Can hear you now. Let me get the video.
Yeah,
Got video now.
yeah, sure. I can see you.
Marcel, I'm so sorry that we had a miscommunication. I had you on my calendar for 5 o'clock today, so
Oh, no problem. It
I
happens.
have a I need a secretary, I think. But
Okay.
anyway, thanks for your flexibility, man.
Oh, I thank you for joining this afternoon thing.
Yeah,
Well,
that's okay. Yeah,
uh, first of all, Stephen told me that you have some cool things going.
yeah.
He used the word Beatle-centric. Can you talk about it?
I think that's a good word. Yeah. Yeah, I have I recently made a trip to England specifically to do a bunch of Beatles sightseeing because I've toured a bunch over in the UK over the years, and I got to go to Abbey Road once, but I never did all of the sightseeing and whatnot. So a friend of mine who has done a bunch of that kind of stuff and who's a big Beatles fan asked if I wanted to go because he was going to go, and I quickly agreed because I've always wanted to do it, but I never made the time to do it. So anyway, one of the highlights of that is what we booked a day at Abbey Road Studio 2, which is, probably about 80% of the Beatles music was recorded in that room. So to spend a day there was just, obviously one of the highlights of my life, basically. And so I recorded a couple of singles that day. One I've already released. It's a song called Truth, and I've already put it on socials and YouTube, and it's just one of my solo piece, you know, instrumental pieces. And but then one of the songs I wanted to do was there was this song that John Lennon wrote in 1963 that the Beatles didn't record, but John and Paul were writing so much material they were giving it to other artists. And there was a song called "I'm in Love" that got given to another Brian Epstein managed group called the Foremost. But when I heard John's original piano demo for 1963, I thought this is a great lost Beatle track. They should have recorded it. So when it came time, to choose what songs I wanted to do at Abbey Road, I chose that song just because I thought, man, I could do a good version of this. At least I humbly thought, maybe I'll do a good version of this. And so I'm going to release that as a single in a couple of weeks. And man, it really turned out great. I played all the instruments on it. So it's me on the drums and the bass and playing all the guitars. And Matt Bissonette, actually my Redcoats bandmate, did the background vocals because he's such a great singer. And so I'm really looking forward to putting that out just because everybody knows I'm such a big Beatles fan. But this was something that I needed to do, and I hope people dig it.
Did you manage to record everything in a single session?
Yeah, well, the way I approached it was this, where I wasn't sure how much, time I'd really be able to afford in that session. So I recorded the entire song at my home studio here, played all the instruments, and then went with the hard drive to Abbey Road and then replaced everything that I could along the way. So I did get all the drums, the lead vocals, the rhythm guitars, lead guitars, and me and my I had two friends with me, Dennis Poggenberg and Craig Hopkins, and they did hand claps with me and a little bit of acoustic guitar. When I got back to mix it, I still hadn't played bass on the new track. I had the original bass track I did in my studio, but I wanted to play to my new drums. So I had to put bass on and then one more J160E acoustic, very John Lennon-y sounding guitar that I didn't have in London, but I have one at my studio. So 80% of the song done there. Then I finished it up here in Texas. And so I tried to really get the sound and the feel of what I thought the Beatles would have done in 1964. But being in that room and the engineer asked me what sound I was going for, I just said, think Beatles 1964. And so he brought out all the original mics. So when you see the video and you look at the mics that are capturing the guitars, my singing, the drums, it's all the same mics that they would have used back then. And even down to the Fairchild 660 limiters that the Beatles used on drums and bass. Those were on the sessions too. So it was just to stand in that room and feel the vibe and to see it because it looks identical to all the old pictures that we've seen of the Beatles working in the studio. So to say it was a lifelong dream is to doesn't even begin to express how I felt about doing that and to have this track that I feel really really good about. It's going to be fun to share that.
Well, I'd like to talk about the new Redcoats album.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Reddcoats 2 includes a mix of many genres, funk, heavy metal, jazz, bebop,
Yeah.
everything. How did
Yeah.
you and the guys manage to integrate so diverse influences into the music?
I think, well, I would humbly say that it's actually quite easy for all of us because all of us we've made our careers by being able to do that. Meaning, Greg Bissonette plays with Ringo, but he also played with, Joe Satriani and David Lee Roth with Steve Vai, and he plays big band, he can literally play everything. And each member of the band kind of has those same chops. I'm known as a rock player, but I do a lot of different stuff, and I love to do a lot of different stuff. So, but the true genius behind the record is Matt Bissonette because he's the one writing this music, and then singing the vocals and putting all the demos together, and then we get in our own studios and we do what we do on it. But so I don't want to say it's easy because it's not easy, but it's a lot of fun, and that's really kind of the reason I think Matt wanted to put this band together, just to have a vehicle for us to kind of just do whatever we feel like doing. And he's very much providing that platform by coming up with these tunes. One might be kind of in a Latin thing, or it might be a swingy jazz thing. And he wrote some stuff for me that was pretty difficult to play metal lines, because he's sequencing on a keyboard, and that doesn't always make it necessarily easy for a guitar player. So I really had to work hard to learn some of these melodies on this record. But I think he was amazed that when he found out that I refused to punch in, meaning that you could do things chunk by chunk, but I need to learn it. I want to really know and really play it in one linear fashion. I don't want to do it all by piecemeal. I want it to be as authentic as possible. So sometimes it's not perfect, but it's like, okay, that's reality, and I'm okay with that. So it took a lot of work, because I'm not a great reader, but I read well enough to learn. But then really, if I'm going to play it authentically, I can't have my face buried in a page. There's nothing musical for me with with my eyes. That's not how I feel music. That can be a way of interpreting and learning, but I need to internalize, I need to learn. So that takes a lot of time. I think I had some of the more difficult work on the record for some of those lines. But everybody worked hard. That my great lifelong friend Mike Medina, he's the one that plays percussion on everything, but he also mixes all the stuff. Everybody's putting the track together and sending it to him, and so he's definitely very much a co-producer with Matt.
How do you decide who takes the lead role on each track? I
Who takes the
mean, the lead role. How do you
ah
balance the individual contributions, I mean, on each track?
yeah. Um, Basically, I think Matt had already kind of made those decisions when he wrote it, or when he whatever, however he arranged the track, because him and his brother Greg on the drums, of course, would play together, and maybe with the keyboard player. But yeah, they would always leave space where they very much had an idea where they wanted me to play. So I think that's all coming from Matt and his vision of who he thinks should have the main melody. A lot of it's me. A lot of it's, there's a lot of, guitar feature on this record. Um, but yeah, there's no quibbling or arguing. Matt's got the idea of who he wants to play where, and then sometimes that might change depending on how it's going, or somebody might, have a different idea, but it's largely Matt's baby in that regard. Yeah.
How would you describe the musical evolution of the band from the first record to this new one?
That's a good question. It's Most bands evolve by playing together, and this band is unfortunately a band that's only played together once. We did one gig here in Texas, after the first record was released. So it's really down to Matt's instincts and what he's writing. I mean, we do want to play some shows. Everybody's been so busy. Matt, of course, worked with Elton John for so many years. Elton, of course, is now just slowing down and stopping to tour, but Greg's still busy with Ringo and all these different things that he's doing. So we got to just get our schedules together. But we want to do some gigs, and it would be a blast to be able to all get in the room and record the next record together. So that could be a nice bit of evolution there to see where we might go instinctually, in that regard. But yeah, as far as any evolution, it's really just down to Matt's songwriting and us just trying to play well.
Matt mentioned that the band's music aims to make people feel good.
Yeah.
What is the main message you hope to convey with this new record?
For me, it's you know whether again, Matt being the writer, you would have to ask him about any particular message. any piece of music I'm involved in, I try to contribute the best I can to lift that piece of music up, whatever that is, whether it's playing simply or shredding it up, whatever it might be. My goal is always just to serve the music, and obviously music, because I play a lot of instrumental music, that music can mean whatever it needs to mean to the listener. A lot of songs I've written personally that have very specific subjects that I'm thinking of, but the listener can interpret it in any way. With the Redcoats, yeah, there's some instrumental tracks there that are just purely for fun, no doubt about it. But I think in Matt's got some pretty deep lyrical things going on, and he has very strong beliefs about certain things, and I think he does a really great job of conveying that. So as far as the intention, you'd have to ask Matt again, because I may be the solo voice a lot, but it's his creative foundation and vision overall. You know what I mean?
The press release mentions that the band started forming during the pandemic.
Yeah.
How did the period influence your creativity and musical production?
Yeah. Well, of course, everybody had no choice but to recalibrate because we couldn't tour. We couldn't really go anywhere. Um, I made great use of that time, as dark of a time as it was in the world with so much death and suffering. Um, I created an awful lot of music, because that's my inclination anyway, especially in darker times. That music is there for me as an emotional release. So a lot of these solo pieces that I'm releasing one at a one. There was a piece called Here Lies the Heart. There's a piece called Our Requiem, a piece called Valsa Morendo, a piece called Beauty and Stillness that I wrote for Jason Becker. My new single Truth. All these pieces, there's dozens of them, and I wrote them all during the pandemic. I was listening to a lot of Chopin and some pretty dark, deep music. So, but I also during that time I got very prolific with live stream performances. I was doing two shows every Saturday on a platform called Stage It, which allowed me to play in the studio here, and people could log on from anywhere in the world. And I did over 170 shows over that time period. So I'm not doing as many now because life has gotten busier and we're active, but I'm still doing them just a bit more sporadically. So music, became even more to the forefront of my life, but so did my family. That was really an even more important thing that happened, is that because I couldn't travel, nobody in the family could travel. We had this time together, and it's really influenced the way I'm making decisions now, whether I leave home or not. It has to be something really important for me to agree to do that, because, you know, I realize that having traveled my entire life, it's not natural, you know, for a human being to do that. And musicians get it, we get adrenaline going and we do it. But man, once I slowed down, I was like, ah, this is what a real life is like. Even though it was in a dark time, it really, I think, and that's not just the music world. There was so many people that thought, and realized, oh, I can do my job from my house. I don't have to go to this office every day. And so people kind of restructured and reprioritized their lives. And I think, in the darkest and horriblest of times, that there was some positive things to come from it, to be able to reevaluate what's important.
Uh, what were the biggest challenges and rewards of working with such talented and diverse musicians in the Redcoats?
There was no the only challenge for me was to try to rise to the level of everybody else. But I think we would each feel that way. And I will say, so, like, there was a piece on the first record called Michael Collins, and literally a 7-minute song, and most of it is the guitar solo. It's like they just again, you have to understand. So they tracked the song without me, and then I got the recording and then played along with that to record my solo. I couldn't imagine of it having been any easier. And what I meant by that was all I had to do was play. That's one take. Standing in this room, and Mike Medina came to record me and produce me, and we just hit record. I played. because the way Matt and Greg as a rhythm section, they just know where to go and where to support, and they've played with the greatest musicians in the world, so they have those kind of instincts, and it felt it. I think it really feels like we're playing live together because I might be going for an idea, and suddenly Greg is there with me doing the same thing, even though we weren't playing it together, and vice versa. There was so much common instinct that it made it effortless for me to play. I don't want to say that I played amazing, but it was easy for me to do the best that I could. You know what I mean? To be the best version of me and not try to be anything else. That's another story there, getting to the place where you can be comfortable with being yourself, you know. It took me till about the age of 50 where I started to get a sense of what that meant, you know.
Mhm.
And I'm still working on it. Still, that's still a work in progress. That's a very difficult thing to do. At least I find personally, but I never felt any other pressure than I would have on any other gig, you know, even though I have massive love and respect for everybody in that band. You know, I didn't treat it any differently because every session I do, every gig I do, I treat it like it's the most important thing I'm ever going to do. That's a lot of pressure to put on yourself, but why do it any other way, you know? And I think that a lot of, you know, a lot of the greater players in the world, they must treat it that way too, because that's the only kind of way you get better, you know, by not thinking, I'm a great player, I'll just do what I do, and it's, you know,
Mhm.
I never personally feel that way. I don't have that kind of confidence. What I do have is incredible intention. I have, you know, the most sincere and sometimes unrealistic intention. I set the bar very high, you know, and so, but I think that's a good way to be okay with not reaching it because you never really do, you know, but you got to keep reaching for it and just really, really go for it. And that is how I treat everything that I do. Yeah.
Can we go back in time a bit now?
Sure. I see Love Gun behind you. So yeah, you go far back as you want.
Okay. And
I saw them on that tour.
oh, really?
That's a
That's
my first
amazing.
my first concert was the 1976 The Destroyer tour, and then I saw the Love Gun tour.
Hmm.
Yeah, they opened
I
with
I
I Stole
I
Your Love.
have the animalized tour poster down
Oh,
here
nice.
too. This is a I'm a huge fan. Well, what were your expectations when you joined Danger Danger?
You know, that's a great question. I just thought it was at that point that was kind of the holy grail. I think that any musician growing up in my time, you know, being in a band on a major label seemed like the holy grail. Like that's what we're striving for, to be signed, you know, to a major label, right? And so that opportunity came along and I jumped at the chance. I had gotten an offer at the same time from a band called Tower of Power, which is a very well-known funk fusion band from Oakland, very musician oriented. So it was an interesting crossroads for me. You know, I could have gone down that path, but you know, I was born and raised in rock and roll, even though I was playing a lot of funk and fusion and jazz. I could have done either one. I think the lure of you know, being in a rock band because of Kiss, you know, that being the day that I saw Kiss, I was 13 years old, and I thought, this is what I want to do. You know, I got to do this. Even I was already playing guitar. I was already actually in my first band at 13. And little did I know that, you know, 14 years later, I'd be opening up for them, you know, on a couple of different tours with Danger Danger. So the part of I couldn't have had any specific expectations except that I knew that I was on my path. And that's kind of how my whole career has gone. I've just kind of followed instinctually whatever opportunity made itself available and then did the best I could in that situation. And that was truly danger for me. I was very much a team player. You know, it really, I was kind of a hired gun in a way where they were already a signed band, and Bruno and Steve, the bassist and drummer, were the main songwriting creative partnership that the band was formed around. But no, it was, you know, it was a magical time just to be in a band at that time in the late 80s, early 90s, and to tour. And like I said, two different Kiss tours, Alice Cooper and Warrant, and just, you know, got to live a bit of that rock and roll fantasy without being a victim of it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
What was your reaction to seeing songs such as Naughty Naughty and Bang Bang become so successful on radio and on MTV?
Well, that was again a dream I never thought could even be possible. Well, because when I was a kid, there was no MTV to start with, but yeah, to be in a band and all of a sudden those songs, we made those videos and they were getting regular rotation and did very very well. But we were kind of coming in at the back end of what you would consider that type of glam and hair band metal, because by the time we got our second record out, Seattle and rap was already kind of starting to get a foothold, and MTV controlled everything. So by the time, our second record came out, I don't think MTV played our video. Well, a song called Monkey Business, because they were already kind of making a shift and they had such control that they could just do that. And if you weren't on MTV, you didn't get radio airplay. Um, so again, it was a double-edged sword, but again, I was very thankful to have any participation in that era of the music business, which it doesn't exist in the same way these days, but it was my education in a lot of ways. But what it really did educate me too was, I realized what was really important to me. It's like all these things that you're bringing up, these are great questions because they are kind of milestones in my life where I go, oh, I thought that was it. That's not it. What I really want is this. From that experience, again with the great, camaraderie of the band and the touring that we did and the wonderful experiences, it wasn't my music, right? And I realized I just really want to create my own music. And that's what became my first record, Ear Ecstasy, that I was recording during that whole time in Danger Danger. But nothing but fond memories, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, that's feel
Uh,
very fortunate to have gotten to experience that.
Everyone from the Danger Danger camp that I talked to seems to avoid the time around the Cockroach album. How the issues affect the band dynamics and morality during that period?
Ask me the question one more time. So about the Cockroach record?
I'd like to know the issues that affects the band's dynamics and the band's morality during that period.
Yeah, well, there was always, with any band, there's always dynamics, personalities and whatnot. The Cockroach record for me was quite joyful in that, I was becoming more and more involved with it's a bit of the writing anyway. And man, we worked so hard on that record. And I remember finishing it up and just thinking, man, we've really made a really great record. But there had been issues between, Ted and Bruno and Steve. I think that kind of came to a head at a certain point. And so that's up to them to discuss all that. But you know, and sadly, again, the industry was changing so much musically, stylistically. Whereas initially, when we handed the record into CBS Records, Epic, Mike Kaplan, our A&R guy, was just like, "This is fantastic. This is phenomenal. You're saving my job. This is great." And then next thing we know, they're not going to put it out. They're going to shelve it, and that was the death nail for the band, sadly. And they made it impossible for us to get the rights to release the record. They wanted $250,000. Um, and so obviously, but there again, I'm going to talk about my education because I thought, why would you work so hard on something that doesn't belong to you? Now, I wasn't signed to the original record deal, but of course the other four guys were. Um, but I had no rights to the record, but I wasn't, signatory. There was those lawsuits were starting to happen, and things got kind of messy. So luckily I got to go back to Texas and stayed out of the way. But it was just really sad when things come to that point. I'm always a peacemaker. I was a peacemaker in my family when my folks split when I was young. But I feel like I'm a peacemaker usually in most bands. I just want everything to go smoothly, But that's not reality. There's going to be differences and there's going to be issues. So I'm happy that we did a bit of reunion. We did some gigs and it's been a long time now, maybe somewhere in the mid 2010s. So it was fun for a minute.
The music
Yeah.
industry has changed a lot since the 80s and the 90s. How do you see these changes and how have they impact your career?
Yeah. That's the beauty now that nothing impacts my career except for technology. And that's the thing when I remember at the advent of the internet really gaining momentum and then somebody said, "Hey, there's this thing called Napster." was my father-in-law. Hey, come over and check out this Napster thing. And we clicked on, he said, well, let's type your name in. And there was my whole life on the computer screen. And I went, this is not good. Well, that part of me at that point thought this is not good because I realized everything I've ever done is free now. And I had no control over it. That was scary, right? But it wasn't too many years later as YouTube took off and all these videos of me playing that I had nothing to do with the production of. People were just either filming or bootlegging. And that became our record label. That became our radio. You know, if people really loved something, they were going to share it. So for a minute there, it was like, oh man, the internet's killing the music business. And I won't say it killed it, but it changed it massively. But then I realized, well, now I have all these fans around the world that had never heard of me, but because I was on stage with Steve Vai or Paul Gilbert or Joe Satriani, and these videos float around, and they go, oh, who's this guy? They've never heard of me. So I started to realize there's so much benefit to it, right? So at every stage, you just kind of have to figure out how to adapt. We all have to figure out a way to make a living. I never started off playing music to make a lot of money, but we do have to be, productive in some way that we can keep the lights on. But somehow, some way along the way, I've just managed to ride it and to keep just creating the music that I really want to create. I stopped very early on trying to be something or trying to do something that I didn't want to do or wasn't, authentic to me. There's just zero point in it. Um, yeah, that's really the only thing I can say to that. I don't concern at all with any kind of trends or whatever. I'm just trying to be, I practice every day to this day, just trying to improve a little bit and trying to write better songs. And again, and now it's like, if I write a new song, record, I can just put it out on social media, and that's kind of,
Hmm.
you know, I mean, yeah, but then you gotta tour and but it's all about just creating your brand, right? It's just giving the people a sense of who you really are, being authentic with that. And then somehow it's just worked out for me. I wish I had a magic formula for that, but that's just what I've been doing.
But isn't the
Whatever,
case, isn't
whatever
it,
that is. Yeah.
isn't it the case of technology changing and those changes impacting the music industry?
Oh, huge.
I
Yeah.
mean, first came the Napster, now we have the digital platforms, the streaming platforms, and the way to consume music has changed over the years.
Yeah, it has. And I think people's attention are just is scattered, and I can be victim of it too. I think everybody goes through that thing now where you realize you're standing still for a moment. Oh, I better check. There's never any peace. We got to learn how to separate from the technology. And I'm speaking to myself, um, and people, get used to seeing 30-second snippets of music. And, it just depends on what you're looking for and what you want. So I don't write music for 30-second clips. I write pieces of music that mean something to me. And hopefully people
Hmm.
will listen to the whole thing because they feel something from it. That's all I can say is important for me. But yeah, oh yeah, obviously the technology has massively changed everything. Mm.
Your solo discography ranges from guitar instrumentals to blues and pop music. And what motivates you to explore these different styles of music?
What makes me want to?
What motivates you to explore, to dive into those different kinds of music?
Anything that I go into, I completely immerse myself in it. Right now, it's Oscar Peterson, a jazz piano player, and he's somebody I come back to throughout my whole life. But I'm just now starting to transcribe it. So my first guitar teacher when I was 16, by 16 I was playing professionally and I was a very good rock and roll player. I could play all the, 70s rock, we talked about Kiss and Ted Nugent and Rush and Foghat. I could play that stuff pretty well, but I knew that I wanted to make a living in music. And so this teacher I sought out, Ron Pritchett, he taught me how to read, started me very simple reading lessons. But because he was a jazz player, he started turning me on to Joe Pass and Barney Kessel and Oscar Peterson on the piano. And Oscar's chops are ridiculous. Like, there's no way I'd ever be able to figure out what he was doing. But he's somebody's feel that I always loved. The way he swings, his drive, his the way he plays eighth notes is really really special. Um, and so like during the pandemic, I mentioned I was listening to nothing but Chopin. There was a period a few years before that I was enamored with Chet Baker, jazz trumpet player, and throughout that there's always pop stuff. I'm always going back to Beatles just because it's my foundation, it's my security blanket.
Hmm.
But the last couple of weeks, I've just gone back to playing blues in the jazz style, and Oscar Peterson is the greatest at that, I think. And so, but this to now, I could have been doing it back then with slowing things down with a cassette tape, but now we've got the transcribe app on my computer, and so I'll just slow things down. And but the most important part of his influence is what I mentioned, and that's kind of why I talked about it the way I did. Was I could have learned the licks, but what I was really learning was the feel. And that's way more important than learning that one lick. That might serve you in a moment, but what served me over my lifetime was absorbing his vibe. You know what I mean? Just soaking in how he played things, how it felt. And that gets in when you go down such deep rabbit holes, it can't help but influence even when you're not aware of it. But it influences even if I'm playing rock and roll. There's quite a bit of swing happening in a lot of ways. Somewhat through the feel, somewhat through the nature of voice leading, dynamics, and all kinds of shape of what I'm doing. You wouldn't necessarily go, "Oh, that guy's a jazzer." At certain times, you'd go, "Well, that just sounds like that," whatever that is. But so that's it's. I just love so many different styles of music. Obviously I did a bossa nova record. That wasn't easy to get to play the way I wanted to play it. So I've got a camp I'm doing in January, and George Benson is the head guy, and he's just one of my favorite musicians of all time and just one of the greatest jazz guitar players. So I thought, well, I better brush up on my jazz just in case. And so why not, And so I don't want to go learn a bunch of George Benson licks because he's got that covered. But that's the beauty of getting into different instruments or different styles is that it's going to give your style something a little different. It's going to flavor, it's going to be part of you that makes you sound more like you. That's David Bowie put it the best way when somebody was trying to compliment him as being an innovator. He said, "No, no, 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 I'm just a collector." And I loved that idea because all our favorite players, they've got these handful of guys or musicians that they've really gleaned a lot from. When you think about Stevie Ray, you can hear that Hendrix, you can hear that Albert King and all the great blues players. Um, and I think, that's you get that inspiration and you're trying to reach for that. You don't get there because you can't be those heroes, but it all ends up coming out like you.
What do you enjoy the most about these camps, these guitar clinics?
Well, it's the passion of the people that show up. You know what I mean? Um, because it reminds me of being in music school when I got to go to the University of Miami for a couple of years to study jazz guitar down there from 1983 to 1985. And the beauty of that time, the curriculum and the teachers were great, but it was really more about the hang and the people that were there to study. Some of the best players I've still to this day have ever played with and hung with. And it's that mutual passion for something, regardless of level of playing ability, because these camps, anybody can come. So you'll have beginners that are just kind of fans and want to be there. And there's like players that should be teaching. There's like just this whole community of people show up in one place. And of course, there's guys like George Benson. And at that camp, it's John Schofield, Stanley Jordan, Lee Ritenour, just a huge list of incredible players. Um, so for me, of course, it's a bit of I'm getting inspiration from the teachers, but I'm also getting a lot of vibe and energy from all the other people because they're just like me. I'm just a fan and just a musician that's wanting to get better. And that's the best situation you can be in. It's like when you have a friend that loves to jam and hang, he's like, man, hold on to that friend. Because those were always the magic times for me in music school. If I wasn't in class and I was gigging 6 nights a week in a cover band, so it was total immersion, learning playing, and if there was free time, hey man, what are you doing? Let's go sit and play. And you're learning from each other. Show me that lick, you know. That's the juice. And so these camps, and when I do clinics and people are coming to hang out with me, I'm honored by that. Because I still go to master classes and clinics anytime I have a chance to see somebody that I really respect and just want to watch what they do. It's what an opportunity that is. It's really, really special.
Well, to wrap things up, what artists from Brazil do you listen to?
That's a very good question. Well, Elise Regina. I'm a big fan of that record she did with Tom Jobim. Uh, and well, all the because I'm such a bossa nova fan, so of course,
João
Roberto
Gilberto.
Joe Gilberto. So when I had the opportunity to do that record with Sidney Carvalho and Roberto Menescal invited us to his studio. I knew, I knew a lot of bossa tunes, not a lot, but for an American rock guitar player, I knew a lot of bossa tunes, but not anywhere near what I needed to know. And Sydney started to turn me on to Caminos Cruzados and some of these, Ligia. I hadn't heard these, so I did it. I did one of those deep dives I was talking about. I listened to everything Joe Gilberto did to absorb the way he sang those melodies, the way he played the chords with those melodies, even though Sydney was the one that held down, Menescal really worked with him to show him the real way to play those bossa voicings. And he did such an incredible job. So it was just my job to try to sing the songs on my guitar the best I could. Um, and the only way to do that is you have to live with it. You have to do nothing but listen. You have to absorb that music. And I very gladly did, because again, if it's something you love to do, you're just receiving all this wonderful information. There's been a bunch of players I've heard. I'm just gonna not be able to come up with names right now, but there's so many great musicians in Brazil, and golly, yeah. And there's a couple of other Elis Regina albums that I got really into from the early '70s. I wish I could remember the
Also
names.
brilliant.
Yeah, I can't think of.
Maybe. It's probably this one.
It's one that Menescal produced though. Yeah. Anyway, I'm a bad boy. I should remember all these names and things. But that's the thing. It's just the absorption. So when I got to do that tour with Sydney and his band, Menescal came out to one festival show, and he and I did Chegas de Saudade together on a stage, and it was like an outdoor show, and it was younger people, in their 20s and 30s, sit on the blankets, and the whole crowd sang that song. I'll never, I'm getting emotional now thinking about it. Just, and to be there with, Menescal, who was there when all that music was, and he was such a part of the creation of that genre. It's a major, major part of my life, and I'm really, really treasure that.
Andy, thank you so much for your time. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And
Thank you,
as for
Yeah.
my final question, one real quick, a minute question.
Yeah, sure.
Uh, what did you think when you first listened to the Danger Dawn album? If you
Oh, the
listened.
Dawn album. You know, I remember really liking some of the tunes a lot. Like there was some really good stuff on there. You'd have to remind me what some of the songs were. But I thought, shit, this is a really good record. I think I've liked everything they've done, even after I've been in the band. Just Bruno and Steve are great at what they do, and whether it's Paul or Ted singing, you know, the foundation is there, which is songs. I think there's some great stuff throughout their whole catalog. I do like the Cockroach record a lot, though. I think that's a great record. You know.
Is it your favorite?
That's a good question. It's funny because the first record, even though I joined the band after the story, right? I joined the band after that record was done. So I'm only on two tracks. And that was only because they went in to remix the record. They weren't happy with the first set of mixes. They hired Mike Stone to mix the record. That's right when I joined the band. So they got me in the studio as kind of a token. Well, let's get you on the record and have me